Hello, welcome to a new video for our course Finance 1. Today will be today will be our last video in the sequence on options, and in particular we'll be covering factors affecting the option price. And by this we mean just three things. Our options affected by the following: the strike price of the option, the stock price of the underlying, be a stock or any other underlying, and the volatility of the underlying. Now, let's start with the first one of those factors. Start with the strike price, and in particular, let's talk about its effect on the call price. Now, what is it? Now, the higher the strike, the higher or the lower the call price. And to answer this question, let's look at the following graph. And suppose that we go ahead and we think of the payoffs of three different call options. You can start with an option, for example, with strike price 60, continue with an option with strike price 100, and also an option with strike price 140. Now, if you look at the graph, it becomes immediately clear that the payoff of the option with the lowest strike price always has a payoff that is greater or equal to the payoff of the other two. And also, the payoff of the option with a strike price of 100 is greater or equal than the payoff of the option with a strike price of 140. So, therefore, the price of the call with a strike price equal to 60 should be greater than the price of the option with the strike price 100, and the price of the option with strike price 100 should be greater than the price of the option with a strike price 140. The answer to the previous question is now clear. The higher the strike, the lower it should be the call price. What about the put price? The higher the strike, the higher or the lower the put price. Once again, let's find the answer in a graph. Suppose that we're considering a put option with strike price 60 as its payoff, a put option with strike price 100, and a put option with strike price 140. What is it immediately obvious from this graph? Well, the important point is that the payoff of the option, the put option with the highest strike, will always be greater or equal to the payoff of the other two options. And the payoff of the option with strike price 100 will always be greater or equal to the payoff of the option with strike price 60. So from this graph, we find, replicating this, extending this argument to any other put option, we obviously find that since we find that the higher the strike, we find that the payoffs will always be larger than options with a lower strike. We find that the higher the strike, the higher should be the put price. So we're done now with the strike price. Let's move into how an option is affected by the current price of its underlying. Suppose it's a stock. So the higher the current price of the stock, the higher or the lower the call price. And once again, let's try to find an answer to this question from a graph. And suppose that we're considering a call with a strike price 100. And suppose that the current price of the stock is 40 at this particular point in time. Now, this obviously doesn't mean that the payoff of the option is going to be zero, because what determines the payoff of the option is the actual stock price at maturity, not just now. But we can say that the probability of this payoff being positive is obviously less than the probability of the payoff being positive if the current price of the stock is, for example, 160. Once again, we can extend this intuition, and that will give us the answer to the question. The higher the stock price, the higher should be the call price, because when the current price of the stock is higher, the more likely it becomes that the final payoff of the option will be positive. Now, what about the put price and the stock price? And once again, let's pose the question. The higher the current price of the stock, what is it? The higher or the lower the put price? Well, we consider now the put option with strike price, say 100. Suppose now that the current price of the stock is, say, 40. And suppose an alternative situation where that stock price, current price of the stock was 160. In which one of these two situations is the probability higher than that the payoff of the option is positive? Well, of course, if we're in front of a put option, if the current price of the stock is now 40, it is more likely that the final payoff of the option is positive than if it is 160. That is, the probability, the payoff at maturity of the option is more likely to be higher if the current price of the stock is now 40 than if it is 160. Hence, extending this argument, we again can give an answer to the question. So, since higher values of the current price of the stock make positive payoffs of the put less likely, we conclude that the higher the stock price, the lower should be the put price. So, let's examine now the final factor that we're going to consider out of those three, and that is volatility. And by volatility, what we're going to mean is the standard deviation of the return of the underlying of the options. Suppose it's a stock. So to do this, suppose that we are first going to examine the case of a call price, and in particular we consider a call price with a stock with the strike price 100. And suppose that at this particular point in time, the current price of the stock is 100. We're not at maturity. We're just some time before maturity, and it happens that the current price of that underlying is 100. Now, suppose that all of a sudden there are news that increase the uncertainty of the return of the stock, making larger swings in the price of the stock more likely. So making more likely very high returns of the stock, but also more likely very low returns of the stock. Now, what does this imply for the payoff of the call? Well, if large moves, very low returns of the stock become more likely, that means that the current price of the stock moving to the left, larger moves to the left, to values lower than 100, larger moves towards values lower than 100 are more likely. But this doesn't imply that there will be lower payoffs of the call option will be made more likely, because they will be always zero no matter what the stock price is, as long as it moves down. Now, on the other hand, the fact that very high returns of the stock become more likely, this makes more likely also that makes more likely that higher moves to the right of the price of the stock become more likely, which means that it does make higher payoffs of the call option more likely. This asymmetric effect in the payoff of the option delivers actually a profit, this asymmetric effect, causes an increase in the expected payoff of the option, and therefore it is reasonable to conclude that larger volatility is associated with larger values of the call price. What about volatility and the put price? Well, the reason is exactly similar, although its formulation is a bit different. So to analyze this case, let's again consider a put option with a strike price 100, and let's assume that the current price of the stock, the underlying of the put option, is also 100. Now, suppose that all of a sudden there are news that make more uncertain the evolution of the future price of the stock. This means that very high returns of the stock will be more likely, but so will be very low returns of the stock. In other words, larger moves to the left of the price of the stock become more likely, but so will become larger moves to the right. The result on the payoff of the option will be asymmetrical. As a result of, if larger moves to the left of the price of the stock become more likely, this makes more likely also larger payoffs for the put option. However, the fact that larger moves to the right in the price of the stock become more likely, this fact doesn't cause that the probability of lower payoffs of the put price will be more likely, because no matter what the final payoff of the final price of the stock is, as long as it moves to the right, the payoff of the option will always be zero. Now, the net effect in this case of this asymmetric effect is again positive in the price of the payoff of the put option, and therefore the larger the volatility, the larger will be the put price. So, in summary, the larger is the volatility of the option, the larger will be the price of both the put option and the call option. And with this, we conclude our analysis of those three factors in their effect on the price of the call option and the put option. And this concludes our sequence in options.